So we got another great piece of news to give you, and I want to end on a high note because this is the result of a big Judicial Watch effort on behalf of a hero. And it's a Fort Hood hero, Joshua Berry, who since has passed away. Well, he was there at Fort Hood in 2009. And Sergeant Berry should have been eligible and should have received the Purple Heart. His father applied for him after he died, and the initial review board said, yeah, you're right, Sergeant Berry should get the Purple Heart. But an official in the Army overruled the recommendation of the initial reviewing body. So we sued in federal court. So I'll give you the details. And the federal court just ruled the Army needs to go back to the drawing board and explain to the court exactly why they overruled their own internal recommendation to recommend a Purple Heart for Sergeant Berry. So what happened is, after the Fort Hood massacre, you may recall, the dishonest Obama gang called it an incident of workplace violence. So no one could get a Purple Heart or any awards. But Congress enacted legislation in 2014 overturning that and mandating that service members killed or wounded in the attack targeting members of the armed forces and carried out by an individual in communication with and or inspired or motivated by a foreign terrorist organization be eligible for a Purple Heart. Isn't it outrageous that Congress had to pass a law like that in order to guarantee those heroes down in Fort Hood would be adequately rewarded? So as a result, the Secretary of Army announced that service members injured or killed at Fort Hood were eligible for the Purple Heart if they met the regulatory criteria. Now, the Purple Heart is not like your typical award where someone has to designate you as having done something heroic. You're eligible as a result of meeting certain criteria. And a soldier is entitled to the Purple Heart if they meet that criteria. And it became clear that Sergeant Berry, whose cause again, Sergeant Berry is no longer with us. And his cause was advocated by his father, who is still with us, Howard Berry. He certainly met the criteria. And what had happened was that Berry suffered a dislocated left shoulder during the terrorist attack. And in witness statements given to the U.S. Army Criminal Investigative Command, and I'm going to read this detail to you because I want to honor Sergeant Berry's memory about what happened here. Frankly, the others who were killed and wounded and otherwise harmed at that terrorist attack. Sergeant Berry had estimated that Hassan fired 30 to 40 rounds outside building 42004 at Fort Hood. That's one of the buildings near the scene of the deadly attack. Sergeant Berry told those around him to get down on the floor and stay away from the doors and windows. When Sergeant Berry heard gunshots hit the metal doors near him, he leaped over a desk to take cover and in doing so dislocated his left shoulder. He then heard Hassan trying to kick in the doors. According to a witness statement from another individual, Hassan fired 3 rounds at the briefing room doors. Now, as I said, Mr. Berry's father applied for the award of the Purple Heart for his son after he died. The U.S. Army Decorations Board denied Mr. Berry's application, unfortunately. And what happened was the initial board rejected the application for a Purple Heart. It went up to another review board, a 3-member panel, the Army Board for Correction of Military Records, and they recommended that Berry get his Purple Heart. There is no question, I'm quoting, that Sergeant Berry's injury met the basic medical criteria for award for the Purple Heart. And it provided the report provided a detailed analysis of the degree to which the enemy, the terrorists, caused Sergeant Berry's injury. So you would think it's a no-brainer here that Sergeant Berry get the Purple Heart, but a few months later, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army at the time, the review boards, Francine C. Blackman, issued a single paragraph memo saying that under the authority I have determined, under the authority of the law here, I'm going to cite the law specifically, I've determined that the facts do not support a conclusion that his injury met the criteria for a Purple Heart. Not sufficient evidence to grant relief. That's all she wrote. So we sued in court on behalf of this cause. And the court, Judge Cooper in this case, agreed with us. He said the court could not meaningfully evaluate the reasoning behind that decision, and decisions which are utterly unreviewable must be vacated as arbitrary and capricious. Utterly unreviewable means that you had this official make a decision without anything to back it up. Judge Cooper noted the Army's final memorandum provides no meaningful analysis, only a boilerplate determination, quote, that the facts do not support a conclusion that Barry's injury met the criteria for a Purple Heart. Why not? Was there conflicting evidence regarding how immediate of a threat Hassan posed to Barry as he sat inside the building? Was the evidence clear but the Deputy Assistant Secretary thought that Barry could have taken cover without injuring himself? Or did she read the regulations as categorically taking the Purple Heart off the table for service members injured while taking cover? The denial letter provides no hints. In turn, the court cannot meaningfully evaluate the reasoning behind it. That is enough to warrant remand. On remand, the Army, assuming it wishes to stick with its determination, must explain why Barry is not entitled to a Purple Heart and do so with sufficient clarity that, quote, a court can measure, quote, the denial against the arbitrary or capricious standard of the law, required by the law. So this is a great, great victory. Now, I wish the court had said, hey, give him the Purple Heart, but he kicked it back to the Army, and the Army is going to have to justify its decision and reconsider its decision not to award our hero, Sergeant Barry, his Purple Heart. And you can get, obviously, the award despite passing away. So this is a great victory. I love this work that we're here doing for this one person, Howard Barry, who is doing this on behalf of his son who's passed away. I love it because not only is it just and a good cause for Mr. Barry, who lost his son, and his son's honor and memory, but it highlights the heroics of that day, the outrage of the terrorist attack, and educates Americans about the role our courts play and the military plays in making sure those who suffer through these attacks are taken care of and honorably highlighted for what they've done. So this is a great victory. It's a thrilling ruling. And I just hope the Army quickly comes to its senses and finally awards the Purple Heart, the well-deserved Purple Heart to Sergeant Barry. So, you know, this isn't about the deep state. I guess it is in the sense that it's the mindless bureaucracy of the Army. It's a case for one individual, but it tells you a lot about the way government operates and that the courts can work. This is a federal court case. You can fight City Hall. You can fight City Hall if you're using Judicial Watch, for sure.